I call this meeting to order. If everybody could please rise and join me with the pledge to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As per requirement of Public Law 1975, Chapter 231, notice is hereby given that this is a regular meeting of the Borough of Clarence Planning Board and all requirements have been met. Notice has been transmitted to the Ashley Press and the 2 River Times. Notice has been posted on a public bulletin board.
Roll call.
Mr. Schulner?
Here.
Ms. Peterson? Not present. Mayor Nolan?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Redmond?
Here.
Mr. Colby?
Here.
Mr. Britton?
Here.
Mr. Stockton?
Here.
Mr. Dan Zeeson?
Here.
Yes, I heard that.
Here.
Mr. Corn? Not present.
But we do have our quorum.
Yes.
Okay. And looking at tonight's agenda, I see there are no motions for adjournment or any other motions under item 5. There's no new business under item 6. And then jumping down to item 7, actions on other business and approval of resolutions. There we have PB 2013-2, Anne Marie Tierney's resolution of approval. That's for Block 44, lots 4 and 5, 29 and 31 Shrewsbury Avenue. And in your packets, you have that draft resolution there. If anybody has any questions or comments about that, it's time to discuss it. If not, we'll entertain a motion to approve it.
So moved.
Offered by Mr. Gallagher.
Gallagher, second by Mr. Colby. Mr. Colby. Any discussion on that motion? Roll call.
Mr. Schulner?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Colby?
Yes.
Mr. Britton?
Yes.
Mr. Dan Zeeson?
Yes.
Mr. Stockton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Next item on our agenda, there is nothing under item 8, or nothing under item 9, unfinished or adjourned hearings or hearings on new business, and we jump down to item 10 on the agenda, actions, action of any other business. There we have review of ordinance O-13-16, and in your packets you have that ordinance. And tonight we have with us Marty Truscott from K&M Associates. Just to give a quick little overview about this.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I know we have some new members, so they may not have been here previously for when we do our ordinance review, so I'd like to read the statute so that everybody, and if the benefit of the members of the public as well.
Okay.
Okay, when a zoning ordinance amendment or any development ordinance amendment is to be adopted by the municipality, before it can be adopted by the governing body, it must be reviewed by the planning board. Planning board task is to do the following. So this is section 26 of the Municipal Land Use Act, and I'll dovetail that into section 62 of the Land Use Act as well. Under subsection A, it says prior to the adoption of a development regulation, revision or amendment thereto, which is what's for consideration tonight, the planning board shall make and transmit to the governing body within 35 days after referral, a report including identification of any provisions in the proposed development regulation, revision or amendment which are inconsistent with the master plan, and recommendations concerning those inconsistencies and any other matters as the board deems appropriate. The governing body, when considering the adoption of these regulations, shall review the report of the planning board and may disapprove or change any recommendation by a vote of a majority of its full authorized membership and shall record in its minutes the reasons for not following such recommendation. It goes on to discuss failure of the planning board to do its report within the 35-day period relieves the governing body from this task, and that's not the case. We are going to operate within 35 days. In addition to that, in section 62 of land use law, it's the power to zone. It very simply says the governing body may adopt or amend a zoning ordinance relating to the nature and extent of the uses of land and buildings and structures. Such ordinance shall be adopted after the planning board has adopted the land use plan element and the housing plan element of the master plan, which we have certainly done. And all of the provisions of such zoning ordinance or any amendment or revision thereto shall either be substantially consistent with the land use plan element and the housing plan element of the master plan, or designed to effectuate such plan elements, provided that the governing body may adopt a zoning ordinance or amendment or revision thereto which in whole or part is inconsistent with or not designed to effectuate the land use plan element and the housing plan element, but only by affirmative vote of a majority of the full authorized membership of the governing body, with the reasons of the governing body for so acting set forth in the resolution and recorded in its minutes when adopting the ordinance, and provided further that notwithstanding anything aforesaid, the governing body may adopt an interim zoning. So both are consistent. The task of the planning board is just that, to review and make recommendations and to give the council findings. It's then up to the council to take, accept, modify, or reject those findings in accordance with what I just read to you. So, why don't we get Mr. Truscott sworn in? So, please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony about the this matter with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please state your name for the record and spell it, and your affiliation with the board and the borough.
Martin Truscott, Truscott, employed by a professional planner, employed by T&M Associates in Middletown.
That's right.
Do you mind if I sit or?
No, whatever you want.
I just want to walk through the ordinance. I just sort of walk through the different provisions so that the board can be familiar with it, and then if there's any questions about the ordinance. So what this does basically is it's not a rezoning per se. It's what it adds a conditional use to the mobile home park, mobile home residence zone district. There's one in town. And it's basically the Shadow Lawn trailer park at this point. There were two mobile home zones in the town, but the Paradise Park area was rezoned to the mixed-use zone. So what it does, it just adds conditional use. When I say just, it adds a conditional use to that zone. Now, a couple of years ago, the town did adopt ordinance that added some additional uses within the mobile home park. Previously, the mobile home zone only allowed mobile homes. The town, in accordance with some master plan language to increase some of the permitted uses, the town allowed single-family houses, townhomes, and mid-rise multifamily. This adds as a conditional use the high-rise multifamily use. So the first part of the ordinance, section 1, is where it deals with permitted accessory uses, which the only thing that's added under permitted accessory uses, the underlying part, basically allows structured parking for multifamily as part of that would also be allowed. And then under conditional uses at the bottom of the page, high-rise multifamily dwellings and structured parking accessory to the requirements of section 21-97M. And then it goes on to define high-rise multifamily developments shall be defined as a building of 8 stories or more. So I think there was some understanding when the ordinance was introduced that it was an 8-story building would be allowed, but what that does is just define what a high-rise is versus mid-rise or single-family. That's to set the stage for it.
Do you know, is that 8 stories consistent with the residential site improvement standards? That
Yes, I believe that's so, yeah.
the categories for the different heights of structures in there?
I believe that's why
I'm sorry, Andrew, I couldn't hear your question.
We have the residential site improvement standards, the New Jersey statutes, and in those standards for residential developments, there's a listing of building categories or building height categories.
How you define them, right, Andrew?
How you define them. Mid-rise is, I forget, 3 to 6 stories or 3 to 8 stories, something like that. High rise, and I just wanted to make sure or ask the question if that is consistent with what's
Good, thank you.
already published in the residential site improvements.
So this ordinance really is the starting point is really that there was a previous ordinance that was adopted by the town in 2007 to allow high-rise as a conditional use. So this is based, it uses that basically as a basic framework, but there's some differences, and I will go over those. So in section 2, on page 2 of the ordinance, that's basically the standards that are provided for conditional use. And I think everybody knows what conditional use is. Basically, it's permitted conditional use, so it's permitted under certain conditions. So it doesn't have the same status as a permitted use by right. Conditional use meaning that as long as you meet those standards, then you come into the planning board for site plan approval. If you don't meet one of the standards, then you have to go to the zoning for approval. So the differences, and I'll review that, are the density. The density that's allowed under this ordinance to be 32 units per acre. And then the other difference between this and the other ordinance allowed 20 units, maximum 20 units per acre. That's the difference here. And then also the other ordinance for residential buildings under number 10, maximum height, residential buildings previously were allowed 180 feet maximum. This ordinance allows 120 feet, which is roughly in the area of about 10 stories, give or take. Depends on, where you measure from and how, and the stories, how the height of each story. But that's basically so that's the limit, 120 feet, and it gives a way of defining it, because if you're talking about high-rise building, you need some definition as to how it's measured from. The balance of the provisions are very similar. Front yard setback of 100 feet to the principal building. I am reviewing the previous ordinance, which, and I didn't mention this, that was vacated by the courts several years ago. I reviewed that, and the setbacks are always set to the principal building, but this ordinance does also allow structured parking. So I thought it important that setback also be to structured parking, because if you're going to have structured parking, that you're allowed, and this is true under the old ordinance, a 45-foot structured parking structure. So you want to have some setback for that too. You don't want that.
And what is the setback right now, Marty, that we're proposing?
For this, under this, 100 feet. 100 feet for front yard, 60 for side yard, 60 for rear yard. And then there's minimum buffer requirements. So the only thing that's different under front, side, and rear setbacks is that I added structured parking as a building, a structure that has to be.
To be clear, that still has to be in those setbacks.
Yes, it can't be just to the principal building, because someone can make the argument,
Right.
well, a structured parking is an accessory to the main principal house.
So anything up there has to be beyond those setbacks.
Setbacks, yeah, whatever they are, yeah. So then the building coverage is 25%, lot coverage 50%, and FAR for the ratio of 1.5. They're all the same as the prior ordinance. Okay. I did under FAR. I did add that under the structured parking would not be considered floor area, because that's really not habitable, occupied area. So then that it shouldn't be really considered as a floor area.
That was part of you looking at that.
That's something that I added. Yeah, that was not in the prior ordinance. So as I mentioned, maximum height now is 120 feet, where previously it was 180. The structured parking height is still at 45 feet, and then goes on to recreational facilities, and recreational facilities are allowed and should be provided, or shall be provided actually, and with setbacks and signs, those are all the same similar provisions. And I'm not going to run through each one of those in detail, but those are
Because that's the same as it was.
same as it was before. Yeah. And you remember that was
Was anything else taken out of the ordinance we passed?
no. So that's really, I don't know if you wanted me to talk about anything else, but that's just sort of a rundown of the.
I have a couple questions. Minimum, like, we're zoning this now for the minimum lot size of 10 acres?
Yes.
The-
As it pertains to the condition.
As it pertains to the conditions use.
So if you have a tract area of 10 acres, then you meet that checklist item to move forward with the conditional use application.
Okay, but someone else could still come in, if someone wanted to put 1 acre, a bunch of 1 acre houses and subdivide it, they don't have to give,
Or whatever else is
Yeah.
permitted in the zone.
yeah, okay.
For this type of use, you have to meet.
10 acres.
Could you talk about, Marty, how this deviates from our master plan?
Okay. Yeah, and the planning board went through a lot of this, I guess it was 2 years ago, and then the ordinance was adopted subsequent in the following year. The master plan acknowledged for the mobile home zone, acknowledged that the evolution, it recognized that the need for adding additional uses in this mobile home zone. So, and the recommendation in the master plan or discussion only dealt with, it recommended adding single-family homes and townhomes. That's it. It didn't talk about mid-rises or high-rises. So in that way, the high-rise part of it is inconsistent with the master plan. And council dealt with that with its prior ordinance, mid-rises, the same thing. And the planning board had finding at that time that the ordinance was partially inconsistent based on the mid-rises as a use that was not recommended in the master plan or discussed in the master plan. Density is another issue. The density was not discussed in the master plan in terms of how the mobile home zone should change. I believe the current density for mobile homes is 12 units per acre. The ordinance in the town for multifamily is 14 units per acre. But so there's no discussion of density differences. Should it go up or, should it go higher and to what number? So
Because there was no different uses discussed.
Yeah, different uses, yeah.
It's a density.
yeah. So in the density would also have to be considered as partially as inconsistent with the master plan. Since again, it's an omission or just silently, or the master plan is silent on that issue. The fact that it's going much higher than what's allowed in the mobile home zone, or even the multifamily zone, would have to be also deemed inconsistent.
Okay, now if this ordinance is adopted, the mid-rises are still a conditional use, and then so we're adding a conditional use.
No, the mid-rises and single family and townhomes were put in as permitted uses. They're as permitted.
They're permitted use now, okay, good.
Do you know what the density is on these points?
Some notes I was looking at today, I don't have all my figures, I couldn't find the rest of it tonight, but I believe it's about 33 units per acre. I think it's about, the site's about a little over 4 acres, and I forget how many units exactly, do the math again, but that's,
Any idea how high those buildings are?
no.
Just curious.
What was that figure for the density?
33.
33.
I actually read that somewhere too. I wanted to make sure that you.
Okay, that's fine.
Talk about the steep slope. How this might fit into that. I guess we would have to wait for the proposed site plan to get into
Basically, yeah, the ordinance does not deal with the steep slope at all in terms of the ridge line or, basically with the ridge line. You do have a steep slope ordinance, which was dealt with a prior application, so again, it would be a site plan issue.
Is that typically always a site plan issue?
Not always. In the mid-rise ordinance, we did deal with the steep slope or ridge line. We recommended, the ordinance provides that the buildings, the mid-rise buildings, or everything, the townhomes too, try to be fit into the terrain, try to be lower buildings, multiple buildings, and try to lower it so there not be as much of a silhouette, But with a high-rise, there's really, you really can't get around
Is each
in
point on
terms
high
of
rise?
silhouette.
Is each point considered on high rise? I never really counted.
It must be, I'm not sure.
I think it is.
It's 10, right? Not even-
No, it's over.
It is? Yeah. I'm in the park there all the time. Counting the windows. You gotta watch it.
Anybody on the board have any questions? Thoughts or comments?
My only comment is I'm concerned about the residents down below as far as like the steep slope. I know this has nothing to do with the resolution, but it actually does. Going forward, I think that there's a lot of residents that have concerns as far as flooding and all kinds of, the sun blocks and things like that. And I think we need to address that kind of thing before we just say yes to anything or no to anything.
I think we'll have that if an application comes forward.
Yeah.
I think at that point, we'll have the ability to, I mean, because I don't understand when it comes to that, I mean, that they're architectural and engineering, so they're gonna be different for whatever they put in there, but
No,
still have to be acceptable.
I agree with that, 100%, but I still think we need to address that now before going forward. We just need to talk about it. You know, make sure before we pass something that we bring it out in the open. Because there's a lot of people that obviously have concerns, but I talked to many of them down below. And a few of them are here tonight, and I just think that we need to be open about it, address it.
I think it's hard to address without having a site plan.
No, I agree, as it from
Yeah,
building
and
standpoint,
I
it's
don't-
tough.
You know, I don't see that anybody would,
Can you put conditions on a resolution? I mean, is there certain things you can do?
I think that was part of like the setbacks and things like that, not having the site plan, we tried to
I agree.
move things back from the hill.
I know, it's difficult at this
It
stage.
is, but, you know,
Yes.
it's hypothetical right now.
I'm just bringing it out there just to talk to everybody
well,
there.
you know,
That's why we
obviously, it's one of the major concerns.
Yep.
You know,
Right.
The visual impact is a concern for a lot of people.
Right.
And then the other obviously is the hill, and the impact it's gonna have on people living on top of the hill and below the hill.
Exactly.
And, but I can't see, us ever approving an application that doesn't have, you know, all kinds of engineering influence.
And you would figure what these.
I know that's coming in the future, I
Yeah, that's gonna
understand
be,
that, as far as that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This is like the first stage, I understand that.
Yeah.
You know, what, you're right, you figure each point is what, about 30-something years old, 40 years old? So the engineering is obviously advanced tenfold.
Oh, I know that.
No, so my point is when that, if there is an application that comes in at some point.
They have to make sure everything's.
You gotta figure that that held up pretty well. So anything that you're gonna have as far as, 120 feet or 8 stories or 10 stories, whatever we're talking about, is probably gonna be even better than what you have there now, and it's gonna be pushed back.
No, I agree it will be, and I agree nobody will pass it without it being that way.
And it's not gonna be as hot.
I just don't want the people down below to be left out.
Of course.
Yeah,
It could
exactly.
be the engineering comes back and says you can't do this.
That's correct.
Right.
That's what I'm saying,
No, that's
there's a
what I-
possibility.
They might put you back to.
That's what I'm saying it now, before we go any further, I just wanna throw it out there.
There might be a way to make a recommendation or condition add a condition to the conditional use there, that buffer from the setback from the top of the slope, may need to change based on geotechnical or other engineering
Which
investigation.
we're, neither of us are experts at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can just kind of leave it vague.
Well, what you can do, and what, you know, I think that we would do also, the council people, is make it a strong concern that you're going to keep that as one of the top priorities, and if you have to adjust it back even further, you do that.
So leave that option open.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But we can say that in the words with the recommendations back to the council.
Right.
And I'll put that on the record, that that's one of the concerns at
Okay.
this stage, which probably is at all too.
Right.
Yeah, and if the app comes here, it's gonna be like a Microsoft.
Oh, yeah,
It's
that'll
gonna
be,
be very hard to.
How long was the last?
We're gonna have to be
2 years?
curious first of all to find out.
You were
what it
sitting here,
is.
Arthur, how long was the last one? 2 years?
I wasn't here for the last
Oh,
one.
you weren't, I'm sorry, you were.
Uh,
It's like
about
2 years.
16 months.
A year and a half, 2
It's almost
years.
2 years.
Yeah, I've been there, I was there.
You were there too, John.
I mean, I don't think it's gonna be much different than what we go on, I think there's a 10-story building or an 8-story building or a 6-story building. The engineering concerns, I think we'll need to see.
I agree with you on the building process, I understand, this is just the beginning, but I feel it needs to be addressed, that's all.
Yeah, I think surrounding will be covered anyway.
No.
And everybody gets discussed.
Technology they have now.
Does anybody on the board have any more questions of Marty or comments or concerns to discuss with what you've heard with regard to his
Not so far.
testimony?
We can, if something else comes up. we can-
And what I'll do is, I'll open this up to the public for questions with regard to the testimony that you heard from our planner. And so the first hand go up, Mr. Mullins.
Marty,
Excuse me.
Peter Mullen, 11 Ring Place.
Thank you.
Who wrote the ordinance?
I did.
And what did you use for guidance for developing the ordinance?
Well-
Was there a committee? Were there any influence from the landowner? Were there inputs from board members?
It was, basically the framework, as I said in testimony, I used the framework of the prior ordinance, but basically it's the directive of council, of the Borough Council,
They directed
For-
you to write
for the-
this ordinance.
for the policy decisions. I told you,
So heights and.
Heights and
things
density.
like that came from the council. How different is this from the 16-story ordinance, the one that was overturned, in terms of the conditions for the tower? How significant, there's a density difference?
density difference, height, I meant density more, it's increase in density, lower in height, from 180 feet down to 120 feet. And then I mentioned some of the different changes where structured parking has to meet certain setbacks, just like principal buildings. Just some of the, let's see what else? There's the definition of high rise.
I wasn't clear about the setback requirement. You changed one of the
No,
setbacks?
I didn't change setbacks, no. But what it changed is the setback, now just talk about front yard setback for a second. Front yard setback is 100 feet to the principal building. That's what it was under the prior ordinance. And I added there, or structured parking facility. So the structured parking facility would have to meet the same setback as a principal building, because structured parking is allowed to be 45 feet in height. So in my opinion, it should meet the same.
And that's on Beach Avenue or Beach Boulevard, that's the front yard?
I believe so, wherever the street frontage is at.
I was happy to hear you say that it isn't consistent with a master plan, both the density and the height. And I'm curious why we would put this in a conditional use of this site rather than a permitted use of the site. My feeling about conditional uses is there is a presumption that the planning board did an analysis of this, the potential developments that could take place at the site, and having made that analysis, they set some thresholds, which are conditions for the development of properties or of facilities on that site, that if met, would be acceptable. But it doesn't give the board a lot of latitude. If they meet all the conditions, it's a dead ringer. You have to approve it. And I'm not sure why that you went the conditional route method.
Because there were so many different standards that I thought this had to meet, that it wouldn't have the same ability to control the development as a permitted use. So permitted use would be, you would be allowed to do a lot more. You wouldn't be able to, and basically to have a permitted use, you'd have to have so many standards. It in essence becomes a conditional use. It would, looks like a duck, walks like a duck. It'd still be a conditional use in essence.
But I see your conditions as being bulk standards. Those aren't conditions. They aren't things that the applicant has to do in order to put a development of this intensity there. It's really, if you put a 100-foot setback here and 60 there and 60 here, it's okay. And if you put a conditional use in a residential zone for a doctor's office, he has to provide, only have so many patients a day. He has to have parking off the street. He has to have things that mitigate the presence of a structure like that. It isn't something that is just telling them how far you can set back. Those are bulk standards.
Well, keep in mind that we're just allowing one use in a zone that allows a lot of uses. So you'd have to have a specific zone to set a standard for that.
I agree, but there are no conditions on this use other than the bulk standards that I can see. Would you agree with that?
Not really. I mean, some of them have to do with signs, or one of them is signs. Most of them are bulk standards, but I mean, I wouldn't want to put a specific zone for this use.
In a conditional use, isn't there a presumption that the other potential deleterious impacts of the development have been studied by the planning board?
Not necessarily, no.
How do you overcome the issue that was raised by the court with regard to spot zoning in this particular zone change benefiting one entity, one property owner?
That's not a good question. That's an irrelevant question to ask this witness, and I'll tell you why. I've read the Jennings decision as well, and I understand the issue.
Speak
of
up,
spot zoning.
please. Jeff.
And I understand the issue of spot zoning is very fact sensitive. Marty isn't the person to decide to tell you whether or not this is spot zoning. That's a decision according to the Jennings case that should be resolved by a trier of fact, which is a court. Very fact sensitive. It's on an individual basis. Asking him to render an opinion as to whether he thinks this is spot zoning or not is really not fair. It's not part of his testimony. It goes beyond the scope of the direct examination. And it's certainly a valid question. It's certainly a valid issue as per the holding of the case. I agree with you 100%. But it's not something that the board would come to a determination as to whether they think it's spot zoning or not. The board can make a determination. Certainly, the issue of spot zoning should be reviewed, analyzed, and dealt with when the ordinance comes to final passage by the governing body. That I grant you. But getting into whether or not specifically whether or not it's a spot zoning case is not. This is not the place.
I'm not sure whether there's a planning question in that, but it seems to me that in changing this particular site use, it only benefits
Perhaps
one
so.
person. And is there a way that the board could see a way to mitigate that? You know, it seems to me, why are we focusing on this piece? Okay, let's do this for this guy. Is this
Then why not ask that question?
Is there
Why
a
not?
general development sense in the board that this kind of development would be appropriate elsewhere in Highlands?
Ask the question.
I just did.
You're looking at me, so I know if you're talking to me.
I can hear.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, I guess there are two parts of that, or two responses. One would be, given that the proximity of this tract to the East Point tract, it may be something that the town might want to consider as incorporating both properties into one high-density type of zone,
Like a high-rise zone?
like a high-rise zone, a higher density zone, as one thing. And so then that would mitigate that. But that would be a rezoning. That would be a totally different animal, and you'd have to set parameters for that zone that would be appropriate to both tracks. So that would be different. And the other part of it is, in terms of the spot zoning question, is really the best way of dealing with that is really through dealing with comprehensive plan and making sure it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. Any changes.
Was there any consideration to changing the zone in this particular site so that it was consistent with what I believe is fully surrounded by an R203 or something like that? Is there any consideration given to letting it go into what is the existing surrounding zoning?
That really wasn't my task. That was a policy decision of the council.
In terms of the boards making their decision, what are the standards that they use for determining the consistency of the master plan? What would be the thought process in determining whether or not this was a consistent use?
I'm sure if I understand the question per se. I mean, I think Jack read out the criteria of how the board's task in this case, and what they're tasked to do by reviewing for consistency, reviewing it against what's not only use but density, and I think I've covered both use and density, and the overall discussion in the master plan of how this zone should evolve, the master plan discussed the mobile home zone evolving with additional permitted uses. That's been added, and this is another permitted use. So, and making it more consistent in that way with the recommendations or discussion. And then the planning board should also look at other goals and objectives in the master plan. The master plan has a whole series of. I'm focused.
more or less on some, and so far, on some of the land use plan objectives, and we're talking about uses and densities and bulk requirements. But there's also objectives, goals and objectives in the master plan, in the housing plan, in the economic development plan. In the housing plan, it talks about diversity of the housing stock. You know, this is another more diversifies the housing stock. Talks about increasing the tax base of the town. That's a solely economic goal, but there's a whole series of things, and also making land uses consistent with other land uses. So in some ways, this is consistent with the East Point
Do you
development.
think it's appropriate to make a comparison with a building that may be able to be built at this site with a non-conforming building in the borough? You think it makes sense to look at East Point as a guide if it's not a conforming use, if it's not a permitted use?
I'm saying that you use that solely as a guide. There isn't another high-rise. It's one use with a high intensity and also the same multifamily. So I'm saying that's partial guide.
But in terms of density, it wouldn't be appropriate to look at that, would it?
What's the existing land use? I mean, you look at everything.
No, but it
It's-
isn't a permitted land use. We've
No, it's not.
reevaluated the master plan several times. We haven't ever gotten anywhere close to that in terms of density.
No, I agree. It's a non-conforming use. I agree.
I think as the members of the board have mentioned, I think setbacks from the ridge, which were part of a discussion years ago, should be, in other words, I don't think that our steep slope ordinance anticipates 15-story buildings or 13-story buildings. There's a lot of difference between the weight of a 3-story building, that it has to be set back 25 feet from the ridge, to a high-rise building. And my feeling is that the board should consider some sort of ratio between the height of the building and the distance from the ridge, so that both the impact of this thing in terms of its silhouette on the skyline and preserving the ridge.
I think what you're really talking about is it's like a ridgeline protection as opposed to steep slopes. Steep slopes is just protecting the slopes so there's no
No,
down
but I
slope.
don't think our ordinance anticipated high-rise buildings, because otherwise the setbacks would be 25 feet.
Right.
And what are they now, 100, do you guess?
I'm not sure. I think
I was getting confused.
I mean, wouldn't the laws that regulate building protect that? You build high rises, I assume, but wouldn't the building, the laws of the state, ridge slope development, all that cover those questions?
No, I think that's our ordinance, and actually, I think that it's an ordinance that the planning board's discussed before. Just like you say, arbitrarily, you should be 25 feet back from the ridge, and I think that you might look at it for different sized buildings differently. I think because our steep slope ordinance, nobody was thinking we were going to talk about 15-story buildings when they developed that ordinance, so I don't think it's appropriate.
Well, we're talking about 8 or more here. Right, so that's what this says, 8 or more. So theoretically, it could be 15.
No,
There was a listing.
Well, 120 feet. Yeah,
120 feet is about 10
So it would be most of that, okay. Andrew, I notice you have a copy of your master plan there. Could you, if it's not too much, could you maybe address some previous questions in light of Marty's answers of other considerations other than just the land use?
Overall, with regard to
Yeah,
goals and objectives,
right.
Yep, I'm looking at, this is the master plan that I'm looking at, it's dated October 2004. I know we've gone through one or two updates as required by statute to do that. This is the copy that I have,
Yeah.
my original one,
With a major, we really do, overhaul of the whole thing. Yeah, we did.
I thought it was 7. Is it 2007?
7, and I think we did a short one.
Probably went over
9
1
too.
year, you know what I mean? I don't know if that'd be the right thing.
You're probably not the.
Not updated.
Well, that's.
Well, I think specifically, there is a section that anticipates the growth of Shadow Lawn. And it says what they think are appropriate developments of that site. So that's one of the areas of consistency, I think. There are also other land use where they're talking about the intrusion of high-rise buildings in residential neighborhoods, the need to control the development of multifamily structures in residential neighborhoods, trying to keep the scale of things in the context of the surroundings. There are many, many instances of that in the planning.
Peter, you have any more questions?
I don't. Thank you.
Whoever is next, please state your name for the record and your address and direct your questions to Marty.
John Mann, 268 Bayside Drive. Marty, when you figured the land up there, the mobile home park owns 100 feet down the hill. Is that considered in the 10 acres?
Yeah, it's
Yes,
part of
it
the
is.
the tract. The tract's about 14
It's
acres.
non-buildable. That whole section there, and then when it goes around the side, it's non-buildable. So you're talking maybe 7, 8 acres. If you're lucky to build on. And now you're talking 10 stories. That hill will never hold 10 stories. And why did we change it from 6 to 8 stories, which we had? The mid-rise is what was approved. And why the big sudden urge to have a meeting the day before the 4th of July? And push this to the planning board right away. Do you have somebody for 10 stories?
There's no application.
There's no application. So what's the big rush? Get some checks. I'm after Palone to do have the engineers do another study on the slump block area. I'm after the state to do the same thing. If that's a slump block area up here, take a look at East Point. There's been a problem with their garage. Go up and take a look at it. They gotta replace all the pilings in there, all the second floor. They don't talk about it, but they got problems.
They're maintenance problems, though.
There are physical problems that are there that are caused by slump block. We live down below. We just had 2 blowouts on Bayside Drive, right underneath East Point going up. Every so often we get it. We still have the pollution there. Some engineers are telling us, well, that's going to be 5 years before that pollution goes away. Maybe 12 years, 15 years before it goes away. Nobody's doing anything about it, except Exxon. They're up there pumping a little bit of crap into the gas station. And we still get the fumes down below. The fellow just sold his house on Bayside Drive and worth $50,000 just to get his mother out of there because she can't breathe.
Well, wouldn't that issue have to be cleared up if that property was developed?
I would think so.
I mean, that may solve that problem.
You know, they say it's 100 feet down, it doesn't affect the problem.
I don't think they'd be able to build
I
it.
think they
That
addressed
sounds
that,
like that could be
I
conditional.
think they addressed that with the Quick Check property, and that's where the,
That's how it started.
that's how it's getting.
Started at the Quick Check property and runs underneath the mobile home park.
Right, and Exxon
Comes
is
out in the
mitigating.
middle of the hill.
Yeah, I know.
There's
They
definitely
got
more
charcoal mats up there and everything. And that last time we were here, the engineers said that's 100 feet down, it doesn't affect the building. And the planning board went along.
Well, would they have to correct that? Jack, whoever would answer that. If that was a problem, would they have to correct it?
If there's going to be pollution and contamination. It's an ongoing mitigation.
Well, I mean, that's ongoing mitigation, it's being the purview of the DEP at this point, so they would be the one that dictates
Oversees
that,
that.
yeah.
Well, that's not easy, so it's.
The other thing, Marty, is I'm concerned, when you go over 6 stories, 7 stories, you gotta make that setback. Nothing in here, there's nothing around there. Last setback was only 25 feet. Gotta be set, you gotta put something in this ordinance that sets it back 50 feet or better. Or that hill's gonna be down the top. It's going down.
Which the buffer is 25 feet. That's not,
Yeah,
that's not a setback.
25 feet.
Yeah, the setback, it's
100
rear and
feet.
side, yeah, 100 in
Yeah,
front.
they counted last time from the hill up, which they own that up, which is non-buildable.
We may want to include, Ms. Manager, might bring up a good point. that the setback should be, whether it's setback or buffer line to the
We were
ridge.
talking about a minimum, and then
From-
Peter
but
said
from
some
the-
calculation.
But from the ridge,
Yeah,
not from the
yeah,
property
yeah,
line,
no,
yeah.
from the ridge.
Yes, Ryan brought up that point, Peter and Mr. Manry brought up that point.
So what you do
I
is
think
you
it's
do like
something
a
that the
minimum,
board
say
is
a-
hearing.
Say 100 feet minimum,
And then
and
maybe
then
Peter's
Go back
onto
to
something there, some sort of ratio between the height of the structure to the setback from
To a minimum
the top of the slope. Or something that can be justified, through engineering studies.
We're, we need to have some scientific data, expert scientific data, I think, to rely on before we set those rules.
we do a minimum,
Well, we can set a minimum, but it's,
or
but
recommend a minimum.
I still think we ought to have some scientific backup, rather than, because,
There's no question
Yeah.
arbitrarily, but I think a minimum should be at least recommended.
That's back to the application.
And then they would figure that process out in the application. If the council or the planning board recommended a minimum, and the council adopted it, then there would be another mechanism in place to go from the minimum. Maybe they meet it by the height, let's say they want to do 4 stories, whatever. Maybe they meet it by the 100-foot minimum. But you can do more as they go higher. If it's,
Jack, you were gonna, something else.
Yeah, I think I may have a fix. As a condition, one of the recommendations, obviously the board is charged with making recommendations.
Right.
One of the recommendations would be consistent with what Peter and Don and
a
everybody
lot of
else
people
is
wait
saying.
on
Is saying that urge the council to develop a set of proper engineering guidelines that will set the building back appropriately from ridge line, steep slopes, all of that, to create something, a scale of with some engineering specificity that would make sure that it's set back appropriately and that it's located in the right spot for the height that's there. So there will be the least amount of intrusion into the slump area or any place else.
Yeah, that we should set specific engineering
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
requirements.
saying, we don't, but we ask the council when they.
We can recommend.
When they draft when they finish the ordinance, to make sure that as part of this conditional use, they add to the steep slope ordinance the appropriate language that would put the scale in appropriately for this massive type of development. That's
Right,
and
and
that'll
that,
cover it.
yeah. And
And that'll address Peter's concerns and Don's concerns, and I think your concerns.
The property lines in that mobile home park runs along Linden Avenue, comes across William Street, goes up Bayside
I
Drive.
don't know what the total acres are. I don't know.
But I mean, the more relevance is, whatever the property size is and what you propose to put up there, make sure that the
So it's
setbacks are
14 total
appropriate
acres, that includes the hill
for
property.
these issues.
Well, that the engineering
Yeah.
guarantees the safety
Well, that's
of
it,
the.
develop a set of guidelines that applicants can follow and the town follows. So it would have to be
And
done
that's
by
all
the engineers.
standalone.
Yeah, it would be done by the engineers.
I just like one answer from the board members. Why do we need 10 stories?
That's not a question to ask the board. Because you're asking your witness questions. Finish your questions with this witness.
Yes,
And then when
why
you're
do you come up
done-
with 10 stories, Mark?
That's the council's.
Unanimously, we asked them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
You were at the meeting.
I know.
Okay.
I think you were next.
Kim Storka, 315 Shore Drive. This is my first planning board meeting, so forgive me if my questions are not,
No,
or,
they're not.
or out of line for this situation. You can let the council members know, I'll see you Wednesday.
I'll be here,
Um,
guaranteed.
These proposed changes are so specific, and I know there's no specific proposal on the table. Has anybody been approached by a potential buyer or developer who said, I want to come into town and I want to build a 10-story building there?
That's-
Unofficially, like off the record, the changes are so specific that it just seems like somebody wants to do this already.
The board has no site plan application.
Okay.
As far as we know, nothing's been submitted.
Okay, and
And I know the council answered that for you at the last meeting also. All 4 of us out there. Or for somebody,
right.
Actually, it's my question.
whoever, I
Now-
know we answered it.
Thank you.
Has anybody talked to the landowner about these proposed changes? Or has the landowner been in contact with anybody over this?
I haven't talked to anybody personally.
maybe we could go through the board, that'd be a good question. Can everybody
I
on the
don't
board
know.
agree
Okay.
with that statement?
Right, I think the owner, landowner, or future developer or anything would start the process with the mayor and council
Okay.
for the zone change request. I don't know if that's happened or how it got to this board, but we are charged with looking at what's in
Just
front of us
reviewing
and
what they gave
making
you, yes.
recommendations back to the council for that.
Okay. And,
This is part of a whole recovery plan. We
I-
have meetings last night till 11:30, and there'll be a huge meeting at the high school in August, and there's gonna be a lot of these things.
I understand that, and I'll get to that in a couple more questions, just
Sure.
bear with me.
And the questions should really, let's try and keep them in order. If
Okay.
the question is for the witness, that's fine.
Right.
If you have a question for the board, we'll get to that later on. I want to get the witness finished.
Then maybe this is a question.
Go ahead.
Can we put requirements into this so that the developer can cover any increasing costs for redoing the infrastructure, drainage, stabilizing the slope, anything of that sort?
It's a site plan.
Site plan.
Site plan, okay.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
When
Yeah,
an
there's a-
applicant comes before us, part of the approval process typically involves, if they have a negative effect or they're affecting those things, they have to address those things.
Okay. And it had been mentioned earlier about the concern with the slump blocks and that engineering today is much better than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's an evolving process. So the engineering that people think is adequate today may not be adequate in the future. And when people thought that putting Hilltop that far back was going to be good enough, it wasn't. So, and I appreciate Ryan and others for bringing up the concern about future landslides, especially by developing the property. And I'm sure the answer, I know the answer to this question. Why can't we make it mixed use and put some commercial up there? Why does it have to be strictly residential? And maybe that's my question for Wednesday night's council meeting.
Yeah, that's better directed.
Okay.
Do you mind if I answer that?
Well, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we did, 2 years ago when we talked about adding permitted use, additional permitted uses, there was some discussion of commercial use. And I think one of the things I remember was the access. I mean, very limited access, to have commercial use up in that area. What would you put up there? We thought something that might be adjunct to a residential use. But it's the access and traffic impacts we thought were inadequate in terms of commercial uses. So that was consideration at the time. So, but there was discussion. It did come up as a consideration.
It actually was
Hold on.
to prevent,
You gotta state your
the
name.
use, sorry, Pauline Jennings, 27 Grove Street. It was actually to prevent businesses from being taken from downtown.
From Bay Ave.
It had nothing to do with access. It had to do with maintaining businesses.
The main reason was not to
downtown.
lose the
That
downtown
was the
business
main
district.
reason.
But it is a good point with access too. But Mr. Jennings is right. The main reason is to keep the business district.
Marty Feud, 50 Valley Street. I came in late, so if you're a witness, could you explain a witness for what? Or
I'm a professional planner, and I help prepare the ordinance that the planning board is looking at tonight, and I walk the planning board through what the ordinance provisions are.
Okay. The question I had was, what's the definition of a mid-rise building?
4 to 6 stories,
Okay. Because
so 4 to 8, 4 to 8.
4 to 8, or is it 4 to 6?
4 to 8. I mean, under the mid-rise, we were looking at 4 to 6, but under the, we set up at 8 stories or more under this ordinance. So basically 4 to 8. So, but I don't think that's over 6. 6 to 8 is not really allowed at this point in the ordinance.
6 to 8 isn't allowed?
It isn't allowed because I think, as I recall, the ordinance that was adopted last year allows 4 to 6. That was what was
So
considered.
is that why they're trying to propose 10 stories? Is that what?
But to allow something higher than the mid-rise,
Okay.
more intense.
The other thing too is, what's the height of the trees? I guess because if the people, there's very few people that live in town that are at this meeting, and this is the reason I'm asking. From a distance, if you look at this project, what is the height of the trees? And what I guess what I'm getting at is people would prefer that the buildings, whatever stories it is, be kept below the tree line for aesthetic reasons. If you,
I really can't answer you because I don't really
think the trees are
know.
more than 3 stories.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I never measured them.
well, I would think the trees are 50,
Four
60
tops,
feet
yeah.
high, but you see what I'm saying, is that people's concern is that they don't want to see another East Point, but, and it looks like, since it was an emergency meeting, this is, if it's economics for the town, the people that are sitting up there, I think they need to think about, and I brought it up at annual meetings, there's grass this high growing in town, and there has not been one property maintenance person put in action, which doesn't have any, it does have something
I
to
get
do with
what
it,
you're saying,
because
but this is the
an
planning board. This is,
correct, if you're planning the town,
we're not planning the town, we're looking at an ordinance that they gave to us to review. Your points are valid, but not for this. I mean, take it up with the
Okay.
council, or whoever, take it up with whoever's creating the ordinance, we're just looking at it, and
Okay.
we're gonna go from there.
okay, excuse me. I'm done.
No, if you,
Melissa Peterson, 17 Bay Street. As there's no other place in New Jersey or on the Eastern Seaboard for this type of height and this type of slope and this type of development, I mean, this is the only place that's really has it. So there's really no basis or for the engineering to kind of figure out what it's going to hold and what it's not going to hold. And to get back to Art's point that you need some data before you can actually come up with the minimum setbacks, you kind of talk in a circle because then you need a site plan to come up with the data, and you can't get a site plan until you pass the ordinance. So how do we kind of cut that circle and kind of come up with the appropriate data? But there's 2 factors here. There's nothing that we can really compare it to, not only in New Jersey, but on the whole Eastern Seaboard. 2, the fact that the number of trees that are up there, it's a huge concern because can we put conditions that they can't cut a certain amount of the forage back? Because if they do, we're going to see landslides. You know we're going to see landslides. So, my fear, and because of where I am on Bay Street and having a neighbor that cut down my trees, and I think there's a neighbor by you that cut down trees and there was a big landslide, that stuff happens, and we don't. Even though we have laws on the book, they're not forcefully enforced. So what's to say we go ahead and adopt this, fire rise, get this done, and everybody's views blocked, so then all of a sudden they just clear the whole 10 acres. And then all of a sudden it steps down in his backyard. So how do we plan around that to ensure that doesn't happen?
Some of the discussion that was tonight in terms of what can be added in terms of setbacks from ridgeline, that can be added as part of the ordinance.
And a review.
Yeah,
A recommended review.
as a recommendation from the planning board, and that can be added before the council adopts it. So that, we don't have to wait for a site plan or for actual plan to do that. So, but I don't think it's a circular discussion. In terms of the whole thing about cutting down some of the vegetation, that can also be part of the site plan consideration too. The planning board review, or it could be a condition that certain coverage certain areas are not disturbed. But that's also, again, covered on, there's an ordinance that covers the steep slope, so. So, did I address your question?
Yes, but how are you prepared? How are you prepared to get the data when there's no other place on the East Coast that's like this area that you can actually compare it to and come up with comparable data?
I don't think it's a special, unique situation. It's a matter of we're not going to have the scientific evidence as to this will definitely work 100%. We won't have that kind of, and I don't think there's any kind of scientific certainty that you're ever going to get. But we're talking about the setback from the ridgeline to make sure that, based on available published information.
Are you saying we're not gonna have that before we pass an ordinance?
No, I'd say it can.
We're gonna have that before we approve the site plan if we ever do, right?
Site plan.
Yes.
If you remember when that site had an application for the planning board, there was a lot of engineering and reporting and testimony regarding the slump block issue, and that would be a site plan issue. I think what Marty's talking about is the board can put on some additional recommendations like a safety net or additional buffers to Yeah, right, to help with that. But to do that actual study that's site-specific,
Right.
and that be part of an application.
Any other questions, sir?
John McAleer, 52 Barbary Avenue. My question for the witness is, you mentioned that even with this new resolution or ordinance, 6 to 8 would still not be permitted. Is that correct? Do I understand you
I
correctly?
believe that's,
And I'm kind of curious as to why, if the rezoning that was done last year, and apparently at much time and expense, set 6 as a maximum, but now this ordinance would allow greater than 8, and if somebody did own the property or were to purchase the property and said, well, I really only want to do 6 or 8, why not? Why? And I don't know if either, again,
yeah,
my
The
first
only one that
planning
would be allowed would be 7 right now. The 6 is, the 8 is, if we, those out, this
well,
seven.
it reads greater than 8, correct?
Just 8 or, this reads 8
8
or
or more.
greater.
Okay. I mean, it sounds silly, but I'm just wondering,
Well,
like, why not just say greater than 6 up to X?
Good point.
And
yeah.
as a follow-up to that, I'm kind of curious as to what does the town get out of doing this? What benefit is there to the town to do this now, as opposed to if someone were to purchase the land or the owner were to decide to develop the land, to approach the town and say, I would like to do this on this property, and apply for a variance for a non-conforming use? What is the difference for us? I understand for the potential owner or the potential property developer, it's probably a lot more involved. Am I correct in that? If they were to just, if we were to change nothing,
Yes, there's a lot more involved. They would have to make an
what does the
application.
town get out of this? What does it buy for the town?
It just provides a certainty as to what the development would be, and it sets certain standards. Once, for a use variance, then it's sort of a open as to what it might be. This sets certain regulations. The town actually controls the height, the bulk, the density, and setbacks as they want it, and not what some developer presents and the board and the zoning board reacts to.
Okay, yeah, I'm a little confused because now with our current zoning, we already control all of those things. So somebody would have to approach the town and say, I'd like to do something that's not within that. The borough would still be in control of that, right? They could say, you can have this but not that, or we'll meet you halfway on something. That is proposed.
Yeah, there you go. Obviously, the town's in control and makes decisions, but the board would be reacting to a development proposal as opposed to setting the standards first and having the developer comply with those standards.
Okay, and then conversely, what, if anything, do we lose by passing this?
So I'm not sure.
I don't know. I mean,
I think the question's good for both the, as it's proposed and the converse question are both good questions. I think if you want to know the benefits and so on to the town, you have to ask council.
Okay.
They drafted it, they had something in mind when they drafted it, so they're the proponents of it, we're just reviewing it for development purposes. They would be the ones that would give you the answer as to the whys and the wherefores as to why they proposed it.
okay, fair enough.
Well, I got another question for you. On this parking garage underneath the building.
That would be Don Mantra.
Yeah, on that road, 260.
Okay, go ahead. Just want to make sure the record knows.
The garage is underneath the building. And the height starts from the first floor. That's the 120 feet up from the first floor of the lobby, right?
Right.
So garage could be 30 feet in the air.
It goes on, it says, reads, that from floor of the building lobby or the first level that contains dwellings.
Dwelling.
Yeah, so that you
Yeah,
can measure from
but
that
I mean, if
point.
you build a garage underneath the building, that could be 3 stories of garage.
I don't agree.
Is a garage considered dwelling?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't agree with his.
If I build a
interpretation.
garage and I build it 3 stories high and then put the building on top, I'm going up another 30 feet in the air. So that brings me up to 150 feet. You don't
It's
include.
just the wording. That's the
Hold on.
wording. It's just the,
Right,
It's
the
just
ordinance,
wording.
the proposed ordinance doesn't list a maximum building height by number of stories, it lists it by feet.
All right.
And then you go to the definition of the ordinance for,
Keeping it down.
But it's not including the height of the attached parking structures.
Right.
Yeah.
So that 120 feet does not include the height of the parking structure. So if you add the height of the parking structure, that it adds an additional 30 to 45 feet.
Yeah, wait, we gotta, let's slow down. Everybody can speak, but you gotta identify yourself. You just can't have everybody pop with questions at one time.
That's my question. Where
Yeah,
do you
well,
start?
yeah, but you're not listening. I got 3 people talking at the same time. I need to, I get it. I want you to speak. But we gotta know who's asking the questions, that's all. It's gotta be done orderly, that's all.
Melissa Peterson,
Okay.
17 Main Street, just reiterating his question
Okay.
that according to your ordinance, it does say it's not, that the 120 feet does not include the height of the attached parking structure.
So to make it in the spirit that we want to put the ordinance in, because the ordinance says 15 feet for the elevator shaft, standard, right? 12 to 15 feet. So we don't want to.
what they're talking about is specifically, it says.
Yeah.
Residential buildings that are 120 feet high, not including the height of the attached parking structure.
So that's not in the spirit.
So if you've got parking above grade, then 125 feet. That's not what is intended.
It's a good point,
So
so
that
we
needs
can
to
Yeah,
clarify.
maybe just need to get into the weeds a little bit, but
Yeah, we can clarify, that's a good point.
Okay, next.
Pauline Jennings, 27 Love Street. This ordinance this proposed condition does not negate the original ordinance. So, my question for Mr. Trescott, were this proposed ordinance to be approved, would that mean that a developer could build a mid-rise, a high-rise, mixed developments, and all the way up, all around, on this same property? Because this is just a conditional use in addition to the ordinance you already have. You're not proposing to replace the mid-rise section of the ordinance, are you? Is that
right, we're not deleting anything from the ordinance. So those other uses would remain in
my
there.
question is, could a developer conceivably build townhouses, a 6-story building, a 10-story building, and all included, all would be permitted under the proposed new ordinance?
My interpretation would be that you have to have 10 acres. So you have to have 10 acres for the high rise.
I understand.
Yeah, I know you understand that, but, so the 10 acres relates to the high rise, so you wouldn't put mid-rises or single family on that same 10
So you
acres.
couldn't use those 10 acres.
You wouldn't use, yeah, you have to have a lot area of 10 acres. Now,
And how many acres altogether?
there's, I believe there's 14 acres on that tract,
Including the hill and
including the hill, so it may not be.
So, but it
That
is
may not be feasible.
conceivable that a developer could put other buildings besides a high-rise building
I think
In addition to.
there. In addition,
Additionally,
it would be allowable.
No, I don't know, I'm not so sure it would be, based on the way this is written. You
So
have to have 10
then,
If they could do that now without a high rise.
I understand. But in it, so you're, and I suppose this again is a question for the council. Is it your, or was it your plan, was it their plan, I guess, to replace the mid-rise with the high-rise?
No, the spirit of it, that, because myself and Rebecca did this, was to
Yes.
come up with another use, add an additional use.
An additional use?
But I believe it's gonna be controlled on a wrong floor area ratio, and things like that, and we're limiting it. 10 acres is already gone if you do decide to go to high rise, right? And then does the other things, setbacks, and then.
Yeah, well, getting to the question, I guess a developer or property owner would be able to develop the property with any of the permitted uses or conditional uses as long as you meet the conditions. But then
they can
it's controlled, right? It's
Then it's
controlled by
controlled.
setbacks, it's controlled by lot coverage, and it's controlled by the density.
So for the planner, then it wouldn't fit, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So if they
A
build a high
mid-rise and a high-rise would not fit on the property, is
Then
that
you could
your
build one of the
professional
Yeah,
assessment?
and then what Marty's saying is, that's gonna whittle itself down into one or the other areas.
because of the
I just have to let him finish. Great. What's that?
Yeah, no, it's.
Let's go back and forth. What, let me just,
My question was for the professional
okay.
planner.
under the ordinance, it would not fit. Professionally speaking, I think a mid-rise and high-rise together in a planned development would be fine. But I'm saying under the ordinance, the way it's written, 10-acre minimum relates only to a high-rise development. And if you had land left over that you could still build on, then you could build single-family or townhomes or mid-rise on the adjoining, whatever's left on there, if it's buildable, if it's developable.
Thank you, that was my question.
The lady in the back.
Melissa McAleer from Steve Marbury. How are you? I have a couple questions, and I'm going to try to stay again within sort of the purpose of
Speak
the
up a little bit,
meeting.
please, Melissa.
If the purpose of the this proposed ordinance is to give the town greater control over potential developers coming in, then why would we not want to put a maximum height within the words of the ordinance to ensure that we do not get something that we do not want? Again, you know, to my husband's point, the current ordinance, as we had said, provides the town with a specific level of control, so why would we not want to further ensure that we do not end up with something that we're not anticipating?
We did put a max of 120 feet, it was just worded wrong, not to include the garage,
Okay.
which we're gonna recommend back to the council. I mean, I will recommend, I can't speak for everybody, that we make it 120 feet. Typically, what you do when you do it is not including an elevator shaft, which should be no more than 12 to 15 feet, which it says in its ordinance also. We just worded it wrong, and we didn't catch it either, that it shouldn't be included. The parking garage is in 120 feet, if there is a parking garage. And I think that we knew that, because you even said the parking garage as a separate building would be included in the setback.
Yeah, I mean,
So I guess we just missed that sentence.
the wording, it says attached parking, so I always.
But we still don't want to
think
go over
that-
120 feet.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Thank you. So can, and forgive me because my math is really bad, what would be the maximum amount of units that we possibly, in the greater scope, goes in feet, what are the maximum number of units?
384.
Yep, 384.
I don't
But
know.
I thought we said there were 14
Well,
acres.
it's not 10 acres.
I thought we said there was 14 acres.
That could be included. I used 12, I know it's more than that.
Do we know exactly how many acres are on that property?
There is 14 acres.
Okay.
That's more of a site plan issue than an application coming before us.
But,
No,
but
density
I'm
is.
sorry, but if we're
The
looking,
density's already listed in there. At
No,
that,
she's
not to
questioning,
exceed
I thought she was
32 dwelling
questioning
units
the
per acre. So you take whatever the acres are times 32, that's the maximum.
If 14, if all
I don't know what
14 were
the
buildable,
acreage
which I don't know, I don't know that they are.
matters until we
414.
actually see a site plan. Make
right,
sure that it's conformed.
so all of this sounds
No,
like
but
we're
it's-
really not sure about what we're trying to control.
No, we
Because
are,
there
we're still
a
in
lot
the
of
site plan.
variables.
We want to add another use to.
No, but what you're saying is, what this process is pretty typical. If you read the rest of our land use ordinance, all of the zones have density features to them. And that's what this is. That's the 32 that is recommended by council to us, or suggested by council for us to review.
Thank you for that. And then I had actually a question from Mrs. Sofico, but I'm not sure if I can ask now or if there's going to be another portion.
Sure.
Can you define spot zoning for me?
Can I define spot zoning?
Yes, you mentioned in response to Peter's question that, this was not something that,
We do not make that determination.
but what is it?
What is
What
it?
is spot zoning?
Zoning.
Excellent.
Okay, this comes from the treatise by Professor Cox from 2013 edition, New Jersey Zoning and Land Use Administration, at page 819. Spot zoning. Spot zoning has been defined as rezoning of a lot or parcel of land to benefit an owner for a use incompatible with surrounding uses, and not for the purpose or effect of furthering the comprehensive zoning plan. Otherwise expressed, it is also the use of the zoning power to benefit particular private interests rather than the collective interests of the community. Yet put another way, where a zone change is designed to relieve a property owner from the burden of a general regulation, it will be stricken as unacceptable responsibility.
So based on what you had just read, do you believe that this ordinance is targeting spot zoning?
No, I can't give you that opinion.
It's not an
That's not why I'm here.
I'm just,
You asked me what I think, and I'm not here to give that opinion. I'll give the board the law. The fact of whether or not this is a spot zoning case, if it's right for spot zoning, is for another tribunal, more power than me to decide, and that's where it has to go.
right, then I would like to open it to the rest of the board. What do you guys think?
I already said in the beginning, I don't want the board giving an opinion as to whether or not they think this is spot zoning. The board can go on to say to the council, you should, as a recommendation, you should review this in connection with the issue of spot zoning, to ensure yourselves that you're satisfied that it is not. That's the recommendation of the board. It's not the board's determination to say this is spot zoning. It's another thing to put it the other way is the issue of spot zoning is valid. It's been brought up by a member of the public. It's a valid point. Review it and make your determination, because you may get a challenge at some point. So it's a valid point to be brought up as a review recommendation.
So as a reminder to everybody, this is questions of the testimony that you heard.
Yeah, if there's no more questions about that, maybe they can address it.
If you have other questions, there'll be
I
another.
do have a question.
Okay.
And
Your name again?
Kim Skorka, 315 Short Drive, and it's a follow-up to Ms. Jennings' point about multiple buildings on this parcel of land. If you had a crafty enough developer who sat down and did the planning right, it is conceivable that with the acreage and the density and all the different variables, they could have multiple buildings on this property, and they might even be allowed to go for zoning variances and get approvals and increase. It is quite possible to have a density higher than this, or to have buildings on this parcel that don't conform specific to this ordinance. Is that correct?
But if you don't meet the conditions of the conditional use, then you're into a use variance application to the zoning board.
Okay, thank you.
Peter?
I asked Jack a question follow-up on this. You would, of course, advise the board or keep the board out of harm's way with regard to the issue of spot zoning, I assume. That is your role on the board, yes?
That's my role.
My role in
My role
reviewing
is
this.
to guide the board through the statutory analysis. That's my role.
And if there was need to give them advice with regard to their, this issue, that would be something that you would do.
I just did.
And I think
To the
that's-
board.
Yeah, I did. As when I mentioned to the witness, I said the board could certainly put in a recommendation to the mayor and council to look at this in light of a potential spot zoning issue, and be guided accordingly when you pass the ordinance.
I'm speaking more of your role as the attorney to the board in terms of them making any judgment on this ordinance.
Well, what about I heard that, counsel. I heard that suggestion from Mr. Serpico, and I understood it.
As did I. Maybe we can make sure we're finished with Mr. Truscott to see if there's other questions.
I had one other question. Can they build one big building up there, 25% of the lot area?
There's nothing to preclude that under this ordinance.
you think that would be inappropriate? To allow a developer to build just one big block building up there?
From a visual standpoint, it's all, for some separation, it might be better. That's really speculative though. That's more of a very visual opinion. I don't think there's an answer to that really.
You are the planner of the borough, yes. And I presume you have the best interest of the borough at heart.
Now you're arguing with my witness. And I'm not going to let that happen.
Does anybody else have any other questions of Mr. Trescott's testimony? Seeing none, we'll close the public portion to questions for this one.
We have no witnesses.
They have comment or questions for anybody else.
I just wanted to ask the board if they had any questions, follow-up questions of Mr. Trescott, based on what's heard from the public.
For me, I handle it as a normal.
Which I think we all do. Yeah. So now what I'll do is open up to the public for comments with regard to this matter. Does anybody have any comments? Yes, sir. One
Arnold
more
Peak,
time.
50 Valley Street.
Please raise your right hand since you're giving testimony and put it under oath. You solemnly swear that testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
The reason for this question is because of what we went through with the other proposal on this property, with the other developer that wanted to build a building. It was pretty much public want to not go any higher than mid-rise. Now we're bringing this all back to the public for whatever reason the public doesn't know because there is no buyer. So it's kind of strange that the people, and I guess it's not a question, it's a statement. Please consider, maybe this is a question, please consider to go back to what the people wanted the last time they went through this whole thing. Because it's a big thing to the whole people in town, not, I mean, there's more people up there than there is in the audience. I'd like to just leave it there.
Any other comments?
Peter Mullen,
Address.
Green Place.
You solemnly swear testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
The master plan document is an important document. I think a lot of people don't really give it much thought. They think it's sort of touchy-feely. But it is basically the town's consensus of the way things develop, and it is the guide for all you people to make decisions as you hear cases. That master plan has in it the hopes and the fears and the upsettedness of people in town, and it's put in one document. And I think that it's clear that what they're proposing now is not consistent with it, and it isn't the will of the master plan. And I think that there's evidence throughout the master plan that isn't appropriate. And I hope that when you send this back to the council, you really look at the master plan, you point out the inconsistencies of a development of this nature on that site.
Yes, ma'am.
Pauline Dennis, 27 Longview.
Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
I'm a little chagrined that each member of the planning board, particularly new members, do not have in their packets or in their presence a copy of the master plan. I will be very happy, I believe I have enough copies. If it is a matter of finance for the town, I'd be very happy to provide every copy but one in the position, which I printed at my own expense. If you so need one, I would be happy to provide one to you.
It is on our website.
It's on the website, I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, good. Oh, good. And I hope you will all study it.
Sir?
Raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear the testimony about to give this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay, please state your name for the record again and your
H.
address.
Manrock, 268 Bayside Drive, Highlands, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Now, I sat on the planning board for a good number of years, and I haven't heard big comments from this planning board about why they want this change. And this was pushed in last July the 3rd. Today's the 11th. It's already up for a vote before this planning board. No comments from the planning board.
That's next. We do that next.
I want to see comments, but no study of it. There's a lot of new members, they should study. I think you shouldn't push this through. I think you should put it off until the August meeting, give everybody a chance to talk to some people, consider what you're changing. I think mid-rise condos up there, or whatever you want to call it, high-rise is on the books, and leave it that way. That's all I have to say. Shouldn't be pushed.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm McAleer, 52 Barbary.
Solemnly swear the testimony about to give this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
I would like to ask that the planning board consider that. Not only-
Speak up, please.
I'm sorry. I would like to ask the planning board to consider and remind council when they go back to council that not only does it not conform to our master plan, but I think that master plan was reaffirmed last year with all the new zoning ordinances, and there was a lot of time and effort spent on that. So to remind council of that, ask them for, if they really want this, a very clear why this property and why now. I do understand that this town needs ratables badly, much more so now after Sandy than it did before. And I'm not against developing any particular parcel of land per se. However, please remember that part of planning for this town should be aesthetics. I realize that's very difficult to quantify, but there is an aesthetic to be considered in addition to potential economic impact. Just to please consider that when you send it back down.
Anybody else have any comments? Yes, ma'am.
Please raise your right hand. Solemnly swear that the testimony about to give this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Please state your name for the record and your address.
Carla Sefalo, 62 Bradley Point Road. And I just want to say that I see a lot of, and I have great respect for the master plan, and the Highlands Business Partnership has worked hard on, fulfilling the action plan or the master plan. But I really think we need to consider a lot of things post-Sandy. I think the town is not going to be able to sustain unless we consider redevelopment. And I see a lot of people talking and commenting out there on blogs and various forms of social media regarding how people want supermarkets, they want nail salons, they want a lot of services in Highlands which we're severely lacking. But the truth of the matter is, without the people to sustain those businesses, we just can't attract those kind of businesses. We constantly have a challenge between flooding and between not being able to sustain the walking traffic or the residents to support those businesses. So it's nice that we all want those businesses, but we need the residents living here to be able to support those businesses so that they stay. So I think it's imperative that we take that into consideration as the planning board and planning for our future post-Sandy. Thank you.
Melissa Peterson, 17 Bay.
You solemnly swear the testimony about to give this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would also implore that the planning board.
Could you please speak up, please?
Sure. I would implore that the planning board be reminded that this is not in the master plan, and the public before, and I think you kind of pulled them afterward, would be highly opposed to something of this nature. So I agree with my neighbor to the right that maybe upholding or kind of not making a decision yet until we have all the facts, the statistical facts on the setbacks, the opinions of your constituents down in town and up on the hill, and just kind of make an informed decision instead of a rushed decision.
Anybody else have any comments in regards to this matter?
Motion.
Seeing none? Wait,
One more.
Melissa McAleer, 52 Barbary.
Yeah, gotta give you note. Solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I did.
Thank you.
And again, I understand that part of the rationale for creating this, everybody keeps talking about ratables. I think there are, as important as they are, I think there is also something to be said about the ratables that we're getting from the people that are currently living in this town. And, you know, I think there is always a balance. Yes, we want to make sure that we get new blood and new families coming in, but we don't want to do it at the expense of the families that are living here right now. Because if you have 500 families that come in and live up there in that high rise, and you have 500 families that leave from downtown, as a result, you will not have made any change. So that's something to really, really think about, because someone had mentioned the whole concept of we need investors. Well, my husband and I, we spend just about our entire life savings to fix and improve our home. We are the biggest investors, every single one of us, for this town. And if we are driven away by virtue of changes that we did not come here for. If we wanted high rises, we would have gone to Fort Lee. We could have stayed in downtown Jersey City. We had plenty of those high rises. We wanted a town such as Highlands that would allow us to raise our kids here. And if we are driven away by virtue of various other people who come into this one high rise, you're not going to make any impact or improve this town. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to close the public.
Second.
You need a motion.
So he's got a motion, he'll make a motion, then I'll make a motion.
We have
All in favor?
Who
Opposed?
seconded the motion?
we need a second.
Need a
I thought Mr. Stafford did.
Ron second, I'll second.
Ryan.
Okay, thanks.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
What do we?
Close it.
To close the public.
Close.
We're done with testimony, we're done with public comment, it's now for deliberation and whatever you want to do.
So part of the process before us is to review the ordinance as proposed by council and given to us for comments. My understanding of the procedure is that we can make our comments, give them back to council, and then council can either pay attention to our comments, disregard our comments, change certain things, and then recommend back to us if they wanted to, or ignore us completely in that procedure.
But you do that with the first step being an analysis of the ordinance in conjunction with consistency or inconsistency with the rest.
Right.
That's your primary task, and then what you said you come there.
And do we have a timeline, Mr. Circle?
Well, you have, the law gives us 35 days after the referral to prepare our report, which I'm not sure the exact date it was sent over.
July 5th.
July 5th. So we would have until the 5th or so of August, unless the council would give us another, when's our next meeting, the 11th or something?
Our next meeting is before the council meeting is scheduled to have its adoption.
Yeah, but with the 35 days it was expired. When, all right, so we're the second.
August 1st is a Thursday.
All right. So we could possibly be a day or two over, but council can give us permission to extend the date. If they like.
If the board chose to hold it over.
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
August.
that's if the board wanted to deliberate further and then at that meeting, take action. But before we adjourn, we need to know that because I don't want to see you run foul of the 35-day provision. Can't have it.
You're saying the 35 days started when?
Exclusive of the day of referral, which is the 5th. So you have 25.
And it's 35 days from July 6th,
Yeah. It's just
so which would be.
35 days after the referral, so I would consider that starting the day after.
Now, the council formally did the referral at the July 3rd meeting. I didn't put it in writing until July 3rd.
Okay, so we'll keep that timeline in mind with this process.
Which is, just so we know, were we talking about August 11th or
Well,
August 10th, 11th?
let's say the 3rd, 27, and another week. Now, you could be one day either way.
Should have another.
I don't look at the calendar.
There's another plan.
Our next scheduled meeting is
We
when?
can still meet in August. We have a council meeting till Thursday. There's no first council meeting.
Okay, so.
When's your next, we could ask the board members who's gonna be here.
Well,
so
that's-
make sure
Oh,
we have-
whatever, I mean, I'm just saying, I don't wanna misrepresent, there is definitely another
I guess
meeting.
my question
Well,
would be,
I
if you
do want to
don't
get
meet,
into the discussion with the board about what we've heard tonight, about the process, and then make a decision on whether to send recommendations as a result of tonight's meeting, or hold it over to our August planning board meeting to wrap up the discussion then, because we will be under the gun to respond or reply back to the council with the recommendations.
What
meeting in between that?
When's the next council meeting, Frank?
The next council meeting is next Wednesday.
Okay.
But they're in
This one's
August.
scheduled for August
There's only
21st.
one meeting on the third week of August. So you would have enough time, right? Okay. That's not.
Can we have a meeting in between that, special meeting?
Of course you could do that too, you have a special meeting.
But we have a regular meeting already scheduled.
We come up, we look at a calendar, we actually come up one day shy. The 35th day is the day before the board would
Oh,
meet.
it doesn't matter when the meeting is, you have the time limit. It doesn't matter when our
so
meeting
then
is.
you need a special.
So, and I don't want to see the board blow the date, because then the council doesn't have to listen to us, not that they wouldn't, but I can't.
I'm stuck in conversation.
Yeah, why don't
You know,
Start your discussion and then
We could
You
theoretically.
can have a special meeting, if you have to have a special meeting a week before, or just make sure you get it done, we can certainly do that.
What we did here tonight with regard to this ordinance, and what we did discuss amongst ourselves too, number one are with regard to the recommendations that we might make back to council. Number one was with regard to the steep slope and whether or not any additional buffer or setback requirements should be built into the ordinance for protection, further protection with regard to placing the facilities near that steep slope. Keep that in mind in our considerations and recommendations. Number two was with regard to, I think there was a text edit needed with regard to measuring the building height. To edit that maximum height requirement at 10A, where it says 120 feet, not including the height of attached parking structures. But that's not meant to read that you can add a parking structure above grade and then have your 120 feet on top of that. So that needs some sort of clarification.
Should be included, that's the spirit of it.
And then we also discussed with regard to the master plan, the fact that it's not consistent entirely with the statements in the master plan. So we have, that has to be included in our.
Yeah, on two fronts, the high rise and the density.
And then we also heard that
next door to the East Point property was about 33 units per acre. And what's proposed in this ordinance is about 34 units per acre.
32.
32, I'm sorry, 32 units per acre.
And then the other last point that I have was the recommendation for the council to potentially look at the potential for a spot zone issue. Make sure that they
Yes.
address that in their, when they deliberate and then vote. So,
I think it's probably important that we also say that while it's inconsistent with
The land use.
the land use elements of the master plan, that it is consistent, especially given Maury's testimony to the economic development and improvement of the town elements of the plan.
So should we start a list of terms that we want to include, send them back, and cover it?
Yes, exactly how that was going.
I can't hear what you're
yeah,
saying.
I have all that we just discussed.
Start a list of what we want to, and then, I guess, vote on it, and, keep going as far as we have to go.
Well, since you've listed all these things, why don't we just send it on to the council?
Well, we have to at least know what we're sending. Let's review that.
All right, the way I have the conditions so far, exactly the way the manager did. First issue is the first one addressed in the statute. Master plan considerations, high-rise and density inconsistent with land use element. There were some other stated goals that Maury brought out, economic goals.
Says what? consistent
That were
with
consistent with that.
Increase the tax rates and diversify the housing stock.
So I had that.
We should list that too.
Steep slope and slump block issues and the ridge line issues, the engineering details. Obviously, I can create that, but that's the area we're talking about. Correct that height issue so that no one would stack it to make it higher than it was supposed to be.
120 feet including that attached garage.
Right, the other one was, I don't know if this is one that you wanted before, was that it doesn't have to be 10 stories. It can be something less. I think that's what this gentleman.
We should permit 7.
Yeah, or permit something small.
Yeah,
Yeah, go give a maximum, but let them go from 0 to the maximum.
Right.
So that they're not required to build a 10-story structure.
Right.
Makes sense. And obviously, the spot zone issue. That's what I have.
And with regard to that steep slope issue, and extra protection for that,
Yes.
I guess our recommendation could be that the council study that, possibly in relation or some proportion in relation to the proposed building height for additional setback requirement, and possibly with regard to incorporating the need for engineering or geotechnical studies.
You know what, on that condition, since you're an engineer,
Yeah.
I'll work with you to develop
Can I ask you a question?
appropriate language that would get our
That would
point
make-
across.
So why don't we do a minimum? You want to establish a minimum and then go from there, or do you want to just leave it?
Well, I think the minimum is established in the ordinance,
I
is
agree.
25 feet.
I think we should increase it, we talk about 50 and 100.
Yeah, but we don't know that. I mean, we wouldn't be the ones to come up with the distance.
Right.
We don't know. So we have to recommend
We have
to
to
them that they go to
recommend
the
that they
They can
appropriate
recommend on
authority.
a sliding scale.
Yeah, they gotta go to appropriate source point to get the accurate
We have to
information.
have engineering data to say what's
Exactly.
going to
We
stand
can't
there.
just venture a guess
We
and
can,
say,
we can recommend back to the council that item needs additional
Or require that, make it a condition of, and it probably maybe already is, but a condition of an applicant. Yeah.
We don't have to pay for
that
it.
there's-
You're talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
wasting a lot of money on engineering.
Yeah, no,
but we have, you have to have definitive standards with certain things. You can't just leave it open to.
Well, I want a definitive standard that it's safe.
I get that.
What?
Yeah, I understand.
That's what I want.
Yeah. I think everybody wants that. No, I get it. And then.
So how would we say
How
that?
did we put it?
I got it. I know what to do. I know
How do we put 25?
25 feet, I think, may have come from the steep slope ordinance and the setback requirement from the top of the slope back. That's listed as a setback.
And that was done with
And
the
steep
so
slope
the
ordinance. I don't know that it was ever done with
It probably wasn't, it was probably done just like this. So why not set a minimum of 4 times what it is now? much of your, how did we know that wasn't its law?
I know, I'm just saying, and then we're here to correct that. So why set a standard that you have no idea?
I'm not setting the standard, I'm setting the minimum.
But then that would be for discussion at the council, what that minimum should be. We can recommend, I think, that it needs.
Suggest a set a minimum or suggest a
Right.
study? Okay. You understand what I'm saying? The minimum, the last one was just drawn out there 25 feet.
I think the discussion was really of the setback from the ridge, whether.
Correct.
Whether the steep slope ordinance is adequate or whether you want more of a buffer. Then I think when that would have to be part of the ordinance. And then as far as the slope stability and safety, that's an engineering study with an application.
Right, site plan.
Because they have site-specific structures and locations, and they do a site-specific study at that time based on the proposed
But
development.
right now, all I'm saying is we have a minimum of 25 and no one knows how we got it. That's all I'm saying.
Did we cover
I think
the
we covered all-
concerns and
all-
everything
all
that
the
we missed
comments.
tonight?
Does the board feel that we've covered the concerns that we've heard tonight, or the issues in the items in the ordinance itself that are listed in front of us?
I think we went through almost everything that was brought up by the public also. That's pretty,
Well, I know we had a long discussion on this one. We're changing a couple of things.
Are we ready to make our recommendations back to the council? Or does the board want to
I mean, that's our
try and
recommendation so
quantify
far.
some of this with a little more clarity before we make our recommendations?
I think we should have every meeting before we do this. It's too much stake here.
What is the goal that we're going to do? What are we going to clarify?
we gotta call a special meeting, because what would happen if we didn't meet the deadline? You basically said the council wouldn't have to come to us, correct, Jack?
I'll read you the statute.
Just tell me
Failure of the
answer. I
planning
don't
board
know.
to transmit its report within the 35-day period provided herein shall relieve the governing body from the requirements of this subsection in regard to the proposed development regulation.
So if we had another meeting and we didn't have a quorum, it's over.
You wasted time tonight then.
That's what I'm
Why
saying.
would
So
we
we
have a quorum at the next meeting?
Well, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, in summertime here, it happens.
It
It's
happens,
not
and
like-
it's happened.
No, I know,
We
but.
wanna make sure if we're gonna call a
I don't
special
know
meeting,
when
that
the people.
we're not gonna
No, I
have a
know.
conflict with the people who are meeting for, otherwise we're basically,
I just think you don't show up. Yeah, but we shouldn't make.
forfeiting,
A rush
we're
decision.
basically forfeiting, and if we don't.
Well, we
get to that
only have,
meeting,
We're gonna have to have a special.
we only have
meeting.
35 days to make the decision.
Right, but we can have a special, can we have a special
Yeah,
meeting?
sure.
Why rush the judgment tonight?
I'm not saying rush it, I'm saying make sure that enough people can come to that date. I
Okay,
mean, you
let's
take off
find
the
out.
council date, you take off other stuff.
I'll be there.
That's
I'll be
what
there.
I'm saying, right? Well, how do you know? You don't know what the date is.
I'll cancel everything. I'll be there.
What we should do, we're gonna do that, let us know exactly what you're
Okay.
getting information on. Don't just come back and say, you know, the same thing. Oh,
No, I
we should
know.
do ridge line. I'm not saying that to you.
Yeah,
I'm saying
and
to
that
everybody.
night, we will prepare the report, because the report has to be transmitted within the 35 days unless they give us more time.
So an extension can be had.
Oh, should the council wants to give us the time, sure.
Now, can the council, grant them an extension at next week's council meeting?
Yes. Again, it's up to them.
It's gotta be to that extent.
That's a good question.
And then we can have a regular August meeting and
What
still
game of table
respond
is
in time
tonight?
for August
Well,
21st?
that's what we're talking about right now.
I can't hear you.
What were you saying?
Like adjourn, table it.
There's a problem on the left side of the room because of the air.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know why we went, let's do it in August meeting.
I was just
Shut that
asking the
off,
mayor if
I'd
we
rather have
could
a problem.
have the council make a decision next
Well, I
week
can't decide with the council, we can put it on the agenda, obviously.
to see if they'll give the board an extension of time to act, then we can have our regular
Just
meeting
have
in
the regular
August and still be able to be ready for the public hearing and adoption on August 21st.
Well, I think that's the best solution. That could work out
Without
that
the
way,
need of a
that's
special
really good.
meeting where we don't know a location or
Who are we charging?
Date.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, we have a talk time with meeting.
What do you wanna know by then and who's finding that out for? Yeah. That's all I'm saying. We'll do that. I don't think it'll be an issue. You're gonna get on the council, we'll have a problem. But what are you gonna, you're not gonna come back in 30 days and have to say, like, what do you wanna know? Who's gonna find it out?
Well, I think the engineer and the board would have to discuss, how to describe some things. I mean, they're not the
No,
chairman.
let's set that up right now, is all I'm saying.
No, I
Come
think,
back in a month.
I think the
We have
clerk,
everything in
the
front of us.
secretary has the perfect solution to the whole thing. And that's
For that discussion.
Yeah, we
Let's
should,
draft, that's what
we
we're
would
saying,
have
let's
a
recommend what
draft
we wanna know to the.
proposed with these comments ready in a draft form of resolution, because remember, next meeting, we still have to transmit the report within the time that they extended. You can't,
We can extend it to the August meeting.
yeah, so we just don't wanna run foul, so we've done it in the past, I'll talk to Rob and
So,
other people, and we'll get
should we start our list, Mr. Chairman?
Let's go through it again, statutory requirements again, please, Jack. There's one we have to,
Okay, I'll read it to you, simple.
and read aloud.
Okay, I'll read it loud.
What do you got there?
Yeah.
Under section 26 of the land use law, okay, the planning board shall make and transmit to the governing body within 35 days after referral a report including identification of any provisions in the proposed development regulations, revisions or amendments which are inconsistent with the master plan and recommendations concerning those inconsistencies.
Okay, so let's stop there. Have we done that? Do we have that? So
Yes.
we've identified it and we've made recommendations.
Well, we've identified it, you haven't made recommendations about the inconsistencies.
Okay, so we've done half of it.
Right. You haven't told me, I haven't.
Okay, good. So we've done half of it.
Okay, and any other matters as the board deems appropriate. And then goes on to say what the governing body has to do once they get it. Okay, but more importantly, that's their business, what they do, and they have to follow the law. Failure of the planning board to transmit its report within the 35-day period, provided herein, shall relieve the governing body from the requirements of this subsection in regard to the proposed regulations. That's the refer.
Okay,
So we cannot run afoul of the time or the time as extended by the governing body, or they have the right to ignore us.
okay, so we've fulfilled, or we're ready to fulfill our statutory requirement of identifying the inconsistencies with the master plan. You're
We've
saying,
identified two major inconsistencies
okay,
so far.
and we have not made recommendations about those inconsistencies.
You don't need to make a recommendation on that, you just need to identify them.
Well, he just said we need to,
Right, I mean, that's my opinion, that you're just identifying them for the council.
we said, and make a recommendations. We recommendation to say, have at it, good piece.
Well, and our recommendations concerning these inconsistencies.
Right.
You can say whatever you like.
Right.
You know,
But we definitely
I
identified
think we
some.
did start that process
Yes.
by listing some other things in the master plan that the projects or property or.
Well, yeah, we listed mitigants, to, how it is consistent with the master plan. Do we want to recommend that they don't do it, or we want to recommend that they do it? Want to recommend that, the board doesn't have an opinion?
The only thing that bothers me sometimes, when you keep having meetings, less people show up, and their input starts to be a problem. If it gets to the council, then you're gonna have more folks going. I mean, for my time of going to council meetings, every time they put something up, the next group of people would show up, tend to be less. And it kind of takes the brightness away from it. That's my opinion. We know, we considered everything that we said, and basically wrote it down, and I'm putting it in our recommendations.
It's the only reason I was asking, what are we gonna get?
Exactly right, which is
all
why I asked my question,
That's all I
let's
wanna
nail, have we
At our
fulfilled?
next meeting, we're gonna have a draft report to send back to.
But you pretty much have that now.
Pretty much
We're
have it.
formulating it right now. Yeah, that's right.
So what else, I'm not, no problem, what else we add? That's all I'm saying. This is identified.
Do we need, do we want to add any more recommendations? We've identified the inconsistencies, that's consistent with our
I thought we
obligations.
were gonna be at least under 2 hours.
Is there, do we want to make any other recommendations?
You know what, I think that we should just send it off.
I think
With
there were
his
a couple
notes.
that we heard from the ordinance.
No,
that we
I
probably
think you've proven down enough, Andrew, and I
No,
like.
what I'm saying is, one of the other recommendations could be that the master plan is an important document, an important guidance document. And another recommendation can be, but post Hurricane Sandy, things need to change.
Right.
And, it may
But
be
all that
time
stuff
to
would be worth
restudy
looking
the
at.
entire master plan
I've
as a
been calling
result
for that
of
for months.
Hurricane Sandy.
But Andrew, all that can be brought up in the council.
All that is a reminder to the council.
I
That's
just
what,
think we
that's
should
what
know,
our report
maybe
says.
we just send it up as is, as you have the stuff written down there, send it up that way and let it go to the council.
Is that a motion, Mr. Colby?
That's a motion.
Offered by Mr. Colby?
I'll second it.
Mr. Redmond.
Second by Mr. Redmond.
Any discussion on that motion?
I think that if we need it, right now, you pretty much get everything that Jack said we have to do as a planning board. To wait another month, I don't, personally, I get it, and I don't understand, I don't have a problem per se, but I don't wanna wait another month, just to wait another month and nobody's working on anything and nothing's gonna change. Because we've already identified that it's not consistent with two parts of the master plan, land use. We already identified, and Peter will probably disagree with me, I don't want to speak here, that it is consistent with new ratables and
other sections.
and diversifying the land stock. I personally believe that it's a living document, it should evolve as things change, and if you don't think things change with Irene and Sandy, then you missed it downtown.
I think it gives planning board members time to do their own diligence too, so I think it's, this is only brought up, I didn't know about any of this personally, I've been on the planning board for not that long, so I think it takes a little time to digest this and really know what we're getting into, so that's my personal opinion.
Let's call for a vote, see what goes. First and second.
Does anybody else have any comments or discussion on the motion?
I believe the recommendations that we've discussed and heard from the public, I think we're ready, as I reread them again, and I take exception to the fact that a lot of us have read the master plan and been involved in the process, and we do think it's a document that's living, but there's lots of good parts to master plans, and some things need to be tweaked. We're not going to beat up post-Sandy, but I think we've heard from the public very well their concerns, and I believe by forwarding with the 7 that I have listed, I think they're all consistent, that the governing body can make decisions with those in mind, and they're very valid, and I think they are pretty specific.
And add whatever we want.
Plus that body can answer questions that we can't answer.
And direct studies and things like that.
Now, I have a
That's my
question, Jack,
comment.
based on what the mayor just said. If they add and change, make updates and changes to the proposed ordinance, do we get it again for another review?
I think the answer is yes, because that's what happened the last time, it's
Yeah.
a significant change.
Yeah, anything significant.
You know what it is?
A clerical edit, like clarification, not necessarily. Those folks, I'm sorry, I don't remember your names, the folks in the corner brought up. That's certainly a clarification, it's a clerical thing.
Which we're gonna send back.
I don't think that you'd have to get it back here for a review of the entire ordinance.
But if it went back
If
there
there
or
was
something,
something
we're going
substantive,
170
yeah,
feet or
something
whatever,
substantive, yeah, it's gotta come back.
Okay. In my mind, that builds a little more comfort in sending over what we have.
Any significant change from what the current ordinance is has to go back again. We did that.
Yeah,
probably
we-
what, four times?
Yeah, for the last
At least
ordinance,
three, right or
in
wrong.
this area, we had three
Yeah,
resolutions,
definitely
three
three.
consecutive months.
So in a year and a half.
Okay, so you have a motion and a second.
Motion and second, any other discussion on
And this is to be clear, to send it to the council with all the current recommendations.
Right, this is the resolution with the recommendations.
Right. And the changes we talked about.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Roll call? Roll call?
Mr. Schulner?
Yes.
Mayor Nolan?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Colby?
Yes.
Mr. Britton?
Yes.
Mr. Dan Zeesen?
Yes. I can just say your name.
I don't know. Mr.
Dan the
Scott?
man, just call him Dan the man.
I just keep saying that, you say no, you didn't say it right, I never heard it said right.
Dan Scheidel.
Hey!
Dan Zeisen.
Sorry, Dan,
Wait,
wait, Jack has a point to
No, no,
make.
and one more vote?
Who else didn't vote?
Oh, chairman.
No, I have him down,
My
yes.
vote is a yes. I didn't say
So
it
the
out loud.
resolution matter passes.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And what did you read in the second?
You initiate councils.
You did?
We do have other business.
Yeah, I need you to get us a couple of because you won't have the report within 35 days, because this won't be adopted until next Monday. No, the report's not being transmitted. The report's gonna be part of the resolution, signed at the next meeting and sent, right?
We need a
Yeah, but I didn't do a resolution. I have no
I
idea.
don't think it's a bad idea to have
Yeah, I have, just to give you enough time to get it in.
Whatever you tell- whatever you
It'll
tell-
take about 2 or 3 days. That's right. I just don't want somebody to say,
So,
oh.
just we need to authorize Jack or the chairman to.
Hold on one second.
That offer, what? Oh, yeah.
There's concern about the report, and we've got to get it back within the,
Right, it's either,
I'd ask for an extension for the report.
I don't think we need to do an extension for the report. I think the board can authorize the chairman to approve the lawyer's,
now, the resolution has to be adopted by the members who voted in favor of it at public meeting.
it has to be adopted at a public meeting.
Yes.
Can we write it tonight?
No.
We've done that before.
Not a handwritten, full detailed resolution. I've never done that in 35 years. I can't write a resolution.
I think you have.
No, I have not.
It's post-Sandy. They gotta make changes.
Well, not like that.
Not like that.
Hurricane had nothing to do with that one.
Okay, so do we have to,
Simple. If the council refuses to give us 2 days, then you call a special meeting of the board between now and the end of the month, and we'll come in and adopt it.
okay, so we have a
We got a fix.
solution to work out.
Either way. And I don't think the council's gonna make us 2 days spend all that money on a special meeting.
Board secretary and council have their direction of where to go, or do we have to formalize that with them?
So what's up with that in your lap?
Yeah.
That's what we just said.
Who's gonna formally vote on it?
Just let me know if the council says no.
Yes.
Or yes, either way.
And moving on onto our agenda, number 11, approval of minutes.
So moved.
In your
Offered
packet,
by Mr. Gallagher,
Second.
second by Mr. Schulner.
Any changes, edits, additions, deletions? Seeing none. Vote?
Mr. Schulner,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Colby, Mr. Britton,
Yes.
Mr. Dan Zeisen.
Yes.
Am I getting closer?
Dan Demand.
And Mr. Stockton.
Yes.
Motion carries.
The minutes from the June 13th meeting are approved. And then in your packets, you do have some correspondence. I think there's a reminder for or a form for the Rutgers course that.
The mandatory training?
Those board members are required to take. So if you need to take the course, please sign up for it and get that one.
Just fill out the registration and provide it to me, and I'll.
Also, under communications and vouchers, I just want to mention one other thing. There are a few of us on the dais here that are involved with FEMA and a long-range planning committee that they've established. And it's actually not for every town. It's only certain towns in the Bayshore area, inside the Bayshore area, that are part of this program. And we're lucky enough to be selected and participate in this long-range planning program with them. And as part of that program, there are going to be some upcoming public hearings with input and suggestions from a wide variety of subjects that will be focused to steering committees within this long-range planning program. And the steering committees will end up whittling down or focusing on a few of those wide variety items or issues into things that FEMA will actually help us get done for the town. It's a good thing. We're pretty excited about the participation progress and the program in general, and want to spark interest from anybody and even people here that might want to sit on some of the subcommittees that are going to be developed through FEMA's process. There's a public hearing coming up, I think, at the beginning of August.
I think it's August
7th?
Seven. At the high
It will
school.
be set up, and I'm sure it'll be published in more detail.
When
But set up
first
coming
normal
the first week in August at the at Henry Hudson High School. So I did want to mention that.
I like that letter, but I know the governor and his wife are coming to this school on Monday at 10 o'clock. They're bringing ambassadors. This is going to sound like it's true. The United Arab Emirates is making a significant donation to any summer programs that were affected by Sandy. So they're gonna be here, some representatives from that group, and they're gonna be here with the governor. He's gonna be in the schools, looking at what we're doing for the summer program. His wife will be with him. They're gonna then donate money at a press conference. What they're planning right now is right outside here. I don't know the amounts or anything like that, and that's all happening Monday morning between 9 and 10 here.
That's cool. Okay. With that said, item 13 on the agenda is a motion to adjourn.
I'll offer it.
Offered by Mayor Nolan,
I'll second it.
second by Mr. Hill, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Okay.